Today we are talking about James chapter 3. And Carl, last week when we wrapped up, I think we ended, or fairly closely ended, talking about the fact that some of the things that James is commanding us to do are things that are impossible for us on our own. We cannot do it without the Spirit of God inside us, making us new creatures. And today's subject matter, taming the tongue, is definitely one of those. Mm-hmm. It's just a subject that we're not going to be able to do on our own. And one thing that I want to bring up right away off the bat is so many times socializing, even in Christian circles with believers, I so often hear people say, you know, so-and-so made me so mad, I just wanted to tell her such and such, but I didn't because I was a Christian. Mm-hmm. Or, since I was a Christian, I just bit my tongue. And you know, that's something that we're doing on our own, but that's really not the point. I don't feel like that's the point of what James is telling us. Do you agree with that?
No, I mean, it's a great first step, right? Mm-hmm. Because, you know, when you think about what Paul said to the Galatians when he talked about life by the Spirit, you know, he listed out the fruits of the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And one of them certainly was self-control. Right. So in doing that, we are definitely exercising self-control. And that's great. That's a good way to start. But if you think about the fruits of the Spirit, you know, when you think about joy and peace and love and gentleness, and, you know, when you think about your reactions, you think about goodness and peace. I think when you focus on those, that really talks about how you process things that happen to you, how you process interactions with people that you might be tempted to become angry, but if you think about, you know, really living and letting the Holy Spirit influence the way you react to things, then you don't really have to have the self-control because of the way you've looked at the situation. Absolutely.
And you know what James does in that chapter, just like you brought up the list that Paul gave us, James does allude to those because he starts out in chapter 3 talking about the tongue and how, you know, we need to be careful what we say. But then he goes right into talking about wisdom, that theme that has run all the way throughout his book. Mm-hmm. And he tells us, first of all, in verse 13, he says, let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness of wisdom. So he's tying that wisdom in again. And then down in verse 17, he gives us the results of having godly wisdom and the Spirit of God working in our lives. And they're just those things that you just mentioned that Paul brings up. Mm-hmm. In the King James Version, it says that we're going to be pure, peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits. And you're right that when we have those results, the fruit of God's Spirit inside of us, we're going to react to situations that used to anger us and that used to bring up that response verbally that we so easily, you know, came to mind, even if we were controlling it. God's going to do a work in our lives, and those reactions are not going to be the same. They're not going to look the same at all.
Right. If we let pride control our reactions, which is what Satan wants us to do, absolutely, right? Then we're going to have a reaction that probably isn't filled by the fruits of the Spirit, right? Mm-hmm. But if we look at it, like you said in verse 13, and I'm just looking at a different version that talks about humility, you know, mm-hmm, the humility that comes from wisdom. Again, instead of being proud, if we're humble, mm-hmm, it will so change the way we react to every situation.
Another thing that we cannot do without the Spirit of God being full within us.
Absolutely.
Because that pride is, you know, I've heard so many people say that sin, at the root of almost every sin, is pride. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that really, again, going back to, and James doesn't harp on this, but I've noticed that in the conversations that we've had, almost everything reverts back to, what are you doing to be in God's presence? What are you doing to make sure that Spirit within you is continually filled up to the brim, mm-hmm, so that you're overflowing with God's love, with His mercy, all of those things that James is telling us are so important for us?
Well, you know, I think about it kind of there can be that cup half full, cup half empty, but I more think about if you can keep your glass full, mm-hmm, of the good things, if you can let your glass, your life, be full of the fruits of the Spirit, mm-hmm, there's no room for the other stuff. There's no room for the pride and the hate and the anger, because you're just constantly filled, as James would kind of teach you to be, you know, filled with the things that make the difference, to live like Christ.
Absolutely. And that goes back to what we were talking about last week again, when we asked the question, what good is your faith? Mm-hmm. Because throughout the book, James asks that point blank to his readers in chapter 2, but throughout the book, he's really asking us over and over again, what good is your faith and how is it evident in your life?
Yeah. How do people see it? You know, you think about if somebody didn't even know you, but they just were an acquaintance, or they just, you know, observed you in a brief situation, would they know you're a Christian? Not by what you say, not by what you profess, but just the way you treat other people, you know, the way you react to things. It's a way, just like you said.
And I think that showing mercy, which is one of the things that you talked about, that is one way that people will know because it's evident. I mean, if they see they don't even know you, but they see somebody wrong you, somebody treat you badly, or, you know, whatever, offend you in a public place, and you just automatically, without a thought, extend God's grace and God's mercy to them, they're going to know that you're different, because that goes against human nature.
Right.
That goes against everything that we are without Him.
And again, if we're constantly cognizant of what Jesus did for us, the forgiveness we receive for all of our ugliness, that should be our reaction. We should be so thankful for that's our only human reaction.
So basically, when we get back to taming the tongue and what James had to say, I like what you said and how you brought up the fact that Paul does tell us to work at self-control. So maybe what we should suggest to people listening today is, if you find that this is an area in which you struggle, because I will admit, I mean, there are times that this has just smacked me right upside the head this week. I struggle with that, and a lot of times it's not so much that I struggle outside of my home, but when I'm home in a safe place, then I kind of let my guard down, and I find myself saying, why did I say that to, you know, why did I do that? And so if this is something that we tend to struggle with, maybe what we need to do is specifically pray and ask God to help us with the spirit of self-control, to continually help us in that area, but then to take it a step further and continually ask Him to renew our mind. That's something that He has promised us in Romans, that He is going to renew our mind and that we are going to be a new creature in Him. And it's not something that happens overnight. We've talked about that before. It's a continual process. And that is something that we can ask Him for, and we know the answer is always going to be yes. If we're willing to be pliable in His hands, He is going to continually renew us. And so we can ask Him not only for us to help or to be better at self-control, but to just lay our lives in His hands and let Him make us new, so that we're not needing self-control in this area.
Exactly, that He's truly changed our heart. You know, I heard a great song this morning by the Sidewalk Prophets, and it's called Live Like That. And there was a line in it that just struck me, and when they say, am I proof that grace can really change a heart? You know, is my life living proof of what Jesus has done for me, and He's truly changed who I am inside? Not just that I have good self-control, and that if I have something bad happen to me, I can hold my tongue or hold my anger, but has He truly changed the way I process all that and the way I live?
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much for sharing. Thanks for sharing that song. I love it when God brings up a song, you hear it on the radio, and it's just exactly what you needed for that day, or it goes along the lines of what you heard in the sermon the night before. I love it how God is so intentional.
Absolutely.
I hope that you guys who are listening and participating with us in this study have a couple more things to chew on this week as you look at James chapter 3. And as you're studying, just let God speak to your heart. It might not be easy as He reveals to you more and more areas of your life that He wants to work on, just like He's doing for me this week. But you're safe in His hands, and He's not going to ask you to give up anything that He is not going to replace it with something so much better. And when you're in His will and His purpose, it's the best place that you can be. So happy studying.